What's up? It's Keith. It's plugged on, and we're finally here, folks. It is episode 620 of Teen Wolf, The Wolves of War. Not only is this the season 6 finale, it is the series finale of Teen Wolf, episode 100, the final episode ever. So this is the last one after this week. There's gonna be no more episodes, and then yeah, and that's a very bittersweet feeling. So the way this video is going to go is I'm going to talk about the episode and talk about the episode and my thoughts of the episode. Then I'm going to talk about 6B. Then I'm going to talk about season 6 as a whole, and then I'm going to talk about the series as a whole. So this could be a bit of a longer video, but I kind of want to get all these thoughts out there in a singular video. So the whole of the finale is kind of prefaced and epilogued with the time jump. So there's been word that there's a time jump in the show, and so basically for the time jump is that there is a kid named Alec who is a werewolf, and he's being chased by hunters, and he's eventually saved by Argent and Scott. And so then while they're kind of driving to go meet with the rest of the pack, Scott's telling him, how Scott got bit and Scott's story, and then and Alec, and he's like, who does that sound like? He goes, yeah, it sounds like my story. But then Alec asks, how did your story end? And I thought this scene was interesting because on one way you could just simply imply it that he's trying to just compare how similar their stories are, but that also almost seems like they're playing it off that the series is Scott telling Alec about everything, which I hope it's the first one, and I'm going to choose to look at it as the first one because the second one's a little cheesy to me, that the whole series is just him recounting a story. So then when we cut back to, I guess, the present, immediately where the last episode ends, the hunters are gunning down on the pack while they're in right next to the shipping containers, and it doesn't seem like they're going to be able to get out, and one hunter comes around to shoot at Scott, but he gets hit by Roscoe, the Jeep, and Styles is behind the wheel, and then we get the scene from the trailer where it says, you didn't think you were going to do this without me, did you? And then Derek's there without us, and then quite handily they dispatch the rest of the hunters before some of them flee. And Styles, there's a funny Styles and Lydia moment where Styles is like, I can't believe you didn't tell me about any of this, but it's kind of overshadowed by Deucalion's last words where he goes, Gerard's biggest fear is that he can't beat you, and he knows it, and then Deucalion dies. And so, there's a nice reunion between Scott and Derek with a 2-hug, which is really nice, but then they get a radio message over Roscoe's Jeep from Gerard, who's quoting Shakespeare, and, he reveals that he's orchestrated the entire events of this night, to bring everybody together, and then he tells him, hey, I have Jackson here at the armory, and you're going to have to come get him. And then he also says, oh yeah, Parrish is caught at Eichenhaus. He's being trapped by his fellow deputies. Scott's dad was rounded up by deputies when he trying to come back to join the fight, and he's locked up. And then also the hospital's being overrun, and Liam and them's there. So he goes like, oh yeah, you're gonna have to go save people. You're gonna have to go spread yourselves thin, and you're gonna have to come to me, and things like that. So I'll do some of the surrounding stories first. So let's do so at Eichenhaus. The deputies lock Parrish up in Holwyn's cell again, and he's they're freezing him, and then the sheriff shows up, and they tell him, hey, we don't want to hurt you, and he says, well, you put your guns down. And so then and they question how old he is and how well he can fight, but then sheriff just goes in and kicks ass, takes out all 3 of them, and that's enough to kind of make them kowtow to him, and he goes, all right, get Parrish out of there. And they get Parrish out of there, and then later him and Parrish, because the sheriff's taken, kind of assumed control of the sheriff's department then, and the deputies, and they get Agent McCall out, and they goes, oh yeah, we're going to tell everybody to give up their guns. And so that's kind of all you see of them until a bit later. So Scott, and then Scott, Derek, Malia, Lydia, and Styles, they rendezvous at the animal clinic and they start talking over what happened, which you get a funny scene where Styles describes how him and Derek got together, how there was like an FBI raid, and you get to see the contrasting reports on what happened, where Styles says that he's the one who rescued Derek and carried him to safety, whereas Derek reveals that Styles got shot in the toe and Derek had to carry him, and now they've, come to help. But then Scott and them tell them about the Anuk-Ite and how, oh yeah, it uses your worst fears against you, and if you look at it, you turn to stone. And so more banter ensues, and then it's basically decided that Scott, Malia, and Derek are going to meet up with Peter at the school to go find the Anuk-Ite, while Styles and Lydia are going to go to the armory to get Jackson. And there's some questions on, we're going to do what Gerard wants us to do. And he goes, well, if we stop the Anuk-Ite, we could stop the war. So while this is happening, Scott calls Theo and tells him to go help out at the hospital and says, do stall them as much as you can. And Theo's like, to stop the war or to get an army? And he says both. So Theo's heading to the hospital to go help Liam, Mason, and Corey. So, how do I want to do this? Okay, so we'll do all the stuff at the hospital. So Melissa wakes up Nolan, and she recruits him to help take the hospital back, in which he still got the cattle prod from episode 11. Corey and Mason decide that they're going to go out and fight, and they say I love you and things like that, which is a nice little cute moment. But then using like a bedpan, they knock out two hunters that are hanging out in the hospital. Liam's still hanging out in the intensive care unit, but one of the bodies isn't a werewolf, and it's a hunter, and he kind of gets up and starts firing at Liam, but Liam knocks him out, but is ambushed by Gabe and two other hunters, and is then saved by Theo. And they have this conversation in the elevator. It's like, I'm not going to die for you. I'm not going to die for you either. And it's like, oh, but I'll fight with you. And so then the elevator doors open. They both go out and fight. And it's honestly one of the better fight sequences of Teen Wolf. Like how the two of them just kind of flow and fight and get into a brawl with all the other hunters. And then eventually Melissa and Nolan show up to help out. And then later Corey and Mason show up. And then eventually Liam is fighting Gabe, and they're kind of going against each other, and another hunter is like, I can't get a clear shot, but Monroe tells him shoot both of them. So he ends up shooting, but Liam gets out of the way and he shoots Nolan, or Gabe. He shoots Gabe, and so Gabe's dying. And then in a moment, Gabe's like kind of in intense pain and he's bleeding out, but then Theo goes up and takes his pain, which allows Gabe to die peacefully. Now, I know at Comic-Con they said that you're going to get to see Theo's heart a little bit, and I get what they were going for with this sequence, but this is maybe the only part of the episode that I don't like. Just because it's like, I don't know, it would have been better maybe for Theo to sacrifice himself, which I know is kind of like a redundant thing for a redemption arc, is to sacrifice yourself, but in Theo's case, I feel like it would have worked better, because though I get it and showing some compassion that he's kind of now indoctrinated to Scott's side, he shows compassion to Gabe and lets Gabe die peacefully, but at the same time, I don't know. Now that I think about it, it's not that terrible of a moment, but I still might have done it better. And those other hunters in the hospital, but McCall, Sheriff, and Parrish show up, and they tell them to drop their weapons. And when they don't, Parrish kind of sends out like a heat wave, and it heats up all their guns, and they drop them forcibly. And there's a funny line from McCall, and he goes, I'm going to have to ask you to teach me how to do that. And it's a funny line. Elsewhere, we have Styles and Lydia they go to the armory to free Jackson, but Jackson's managed to free himself by sweet-talking his way to another hunter, and he reveals, oh yeah, I'm part Kanema. And he reveals that his eyes shift. And his description of it's kind of cool, because he goes, oh yeah, it's like I can shift from one to the other. And he's like, yeah, I used to drive a Porsche that I could go from automatic to manual, but I can't drive sports cars anymore because there wasn't room for my tail. And then he uses his tail to break free. He's about to go out a door to fight, and then he runs into Styles and Lydia. And Styles kicks open the door, but then when Jackson and Lydia see each other, she runs at him screaming, it's you, and they hug, and it's a kind of a sweet moment, but Styles just kind of steps in. He goes, okay, I'm done with this, watch the hands and stuff like that. And it's another funny moment. And then they go out looking for Ethan, and he goes, oh, Ethan's here? He goes, yeah, he's with me. And then they kind of put two to two together, and Lydia's like, oh my god, it took you long enough to figure it out. And it's a funny moment. And then Scott calls Styles and gets Styles to grab something from the vault, or from like from the compound, and then Lydia and Jackson go free Ethan before heading off to the school. So so now all the stuff that happens at the school. So now I got everything else figured out. Malia calls Peter and asks him what's going on, and Peter's found 2 stone bodies, and she says, okay, don't look. But then Peter hears Malia's voice and turns around, and he sees the Anuk-Ite and gets turned to stone. So then Scott and the rest of them show up, and after seeing Peter being frozen, it's turned out he's not dead. He still has a heartbeat. So that's good news. But as they're maneuvering about the school, Monroe is there, and she shoots Scott with a yellow wolfsbane bullet. The yellow wolfsbane that Kate gave Gerard is put into this bullet, and it shoots Scott to weaken him. So Scott's like, it's okay, fine, it's fine. Go stop her, and then I'll heal. But then Derek realizes what it is, and he's like, you're not gonna heal. So he takes Scott into like a chemistry room and then burns the wolfsbane out like he did for Peter in season 4. But then he hears something. And this is another one of the cooler moments of the episode. Derek goes out into the hallway, and then he hears Jennifer's voice, the Duroc. And he kind of closes his eyes and turns around, and we see Jennifer kind of walking towards him, and she's, trying to tempt him to open his eyes. And he attempts to fight back, but it doesn't go well. And then eventually he does open his eyes, and he's turned to stone. And I think this moment's extra cool, too, because it kind of shows that, like, in some ways, his worst fear, his worst regret was the whole thing with Jennifer, even more so than with Kate, because in some ways he probably knew Kate was bad news, but then Jennifer, manipulated him, and there was just so much wrong with that. But then also almost this fear that she, probably even more so than Kate, she was able to manipulate him more than anybody else. So Lydia, Jackson, and Ethan show up at the school, and they're immediately overwhelmed by the fear, so they all close their eyes. Lydia manages to find her way into the guidance office, but she's met by Malia, who's also been turned to stone. I guess that happens off screen. Jackson stumbles into the locker room, and he hears Ethan's voice, and Ethan tells him that he's right in front of him, open your eyes, and he opens his eyes, and he's met by the Anuk-Ite, and it turns out Ethan was already turned to stone. So now, Scott has stumbled and probably the best sequence of the whole episode, from like start to finish, with all the stuff that happens in the library. Scott stumbles his way into the library, and he's hiding behind bookshelves. We hear somebody walking up, and then it's the Anuk-Ite taking the form of Void Styles and the Nogitsune, and he's saying, hey, you failed everyone, Scott. It's your fault. They're all turned to stone. They all went insane because of me. And he even turns into the bandaged man, Nogitsune. And so then they taunt him, saying, you failed everyone, especially her. You failed Allison. And he tries to fight, and then the Nogitsune tries to get him to open his eyes, but Scott fights back and says, I know how to fight you, and I know how to beat you. And then he takes his claws, and he basically gouges his eyes out with his claws so that he's blind. And in another cool moment, you see that the Nogitsune turns into a berserker to try to fight Scott, and he turns into an Oni. And before turning back into Void Styles and the Nogitsune and things like that. And I think this is extra cool because when you think about it, these were Scott's biggest fear is failing everyone. And in some ways, these are the things that he failed at doing. So first off, like, Void Styles and the Nogitsune definitely represent Allison's death and how he couldn't stop that. And then the Oni represents, he could never beat the Oni. And then also, it kind of maybe represents his failure to help Kira in a lot of ways. And then the Berserker, again, represents, he could never beat a Berserker, but also at the same time, it represents how he almost became a monster. He was beaten by a Berserker. But then, he's talking to the Anuk-Ite, and he says, it's your fault. You wanted to be part me. You wanted to be like me. You wanted to be a werewolf. And there's certain rules with werewolves, and you kind of can't deal with those. And the Styles shows up, and he throws something at the Nogitsune, and it turns out it's a jar of mountain ash. And the mountain ash kind of goes around him, and then the Anuk-Ite turns to stone, and then eventually crumbles away. Which is a little bit of an ex machina thing, but I kind of get it in some ways, that like the Anuk-Ite gets completely surrounded by this by the wolfsbane or by the mountain ash, and that kind of just hurts him. And so and then I'll finish up the ending section of the episode here in a second. What happens after that? So while all this is going on, Kate goes to the bunker, and she's looking for more of the yellow wolfsbane. But then Gerard reveals, oh, he put it in that bullet for Monroe, and she says, you gave all of it for one bullet, and he goes, not all of it, and he says, also this one, and then he shoots Kate. And it's kind of like, and he taunts her before Chris shows up. And Chris is like, Scott's figured out how to beat him. And then apparently Gerard has also figured out how to beat him, which Gerard had this in the vault. So maybe Gerard, again, was once Scott was taken care of, Gerard was planning on defeating this thing. But, and then Kate's like, you're the one, you only saw him, old man. That's where you failed with this. And then, Gerard says, he killed our family, and then Chris says, your family's right in front of you, and he just walks away as Kate turns into a were-jaguar and attacks Gerard, and I'm assuming killing him. That's probably a good assumption. So when Scott threw the mountain ash on the Anuk-Ite, it freed all of the stone, the people who were turned to stone, and so Monroe is forced to flee, and everybody rendezvous back in the library, and Scott's eyes are still gouged out, and he can't heal. And Malia's like pleading with him to concentrate and heal. And then Lydia tells her to kiss him, and that'll help. And so Malia kisses Scott, and that helps him focus, kind of in a similar way again to her kissing Styles to focus in season 4, but then also Lydia kissing Styles to stop his panic attack in season 3. And then Scott heals, and then we come back to the end of the episode where Scott reveals, like, oh yeah, Monroe got away, and that she still has followers, but they're there fighting. And then he tells Alec, she's going to come for you, and you can be with us and you can fight, but it's your choice. And then the pack shows up, and eventually he does decide to go with them, and they just kind of walk off with the full moon in the background, and that's the end of the episode. So yeah, I thought it was a great episode. The only couple things that I wish maybe they would have done differently is I wish it was longer. Now it's already 10 minutes longer, which 10 minutes you can tell a lot of story, but I wish maybe that they would have maybe used the a little bit more time, because a couple more storylines could have been wrapped up rather nicely. I feel like they could have done a little bit more, because there wasn't any scenes between Scott, Jackson, and Ethan, which I thought would have been cool. Maybe Derek and Jackson, like just more scenes involving all the characters. It seemed like the characters were only associating with other characters that made sense, but that's okay. Also, just because really quickly before I get too far off, they do like a montage of like what everybody's doing. So like it looks like Corey and Mason are working with Deaton, and they're trying to help supernatural creatures. Nolan and Liam are on good terms now, and they want to be co-captains of the lacrosse team. They've settled the differences. Chris and Melissa are together, and they're happy. And that's really it, because all the other pack members, oh yeah, and then Jackson and Ethan are happy, and they're back in London, and they're happy. And so, they kind of wrap up everybody who's not there at the end in a lot of ways, their storylines. But, yeah, like I said, I think this is the best finale that they could have done. And not that this was a bad finale. I honestly think this is definitely one of the better episodes of the show. Probably one of the best episodes of 6B, if not season 6 in general. So, yeah. So 6B, I think, was really good. I think they did a good job bringing everything back to the original, making it about fear, taking an idea and making it really big. The supernaturals get found out, in which they talk about it in the ending of the episode. They say more people know about our secret, but they're not afraid of us anymore. They're accepting us. And yeah, there will always be people who are afraid, but not everybody is. And I like that. And that was kind of like the theme. And I liked that they brought Gerard back and all that. And I like how they brought back a lot of returning characters, but the returning characters didn't take over the show. I know a lot of people, when they heard that Jackson, Ethan, and Derek were back, it's like, oh, they're going to be in every episode, and now they're going to be the focus of the show. But I'm glad that they weren't, because that seems a little shitty to kind of have these actors who've been consistent on the show, like the Corey, Mason, and Liam, and characters like that. They've been consistent on the show for their whole time, and then be like, hey, you're going to get your screen time cut, because these guys who left the show a couple years ago, yeah, they're coming back, and we want to give them your screen time. That just doesn't really sit well with me. I think Scott and Malia was done very, very well. over the course of the whole thing. I liked that, it wasn't a completely like I don't think it was shoved down our throats too much. There was a natural progression, and they weren't like, oh my god, I love you by the end of it. Like, sure, they care for each other, but maybe they haven't gotten to that point. Again, character returnings. There's a couple of things I might have done differently. Again, with like, since they knew that they weren't going to get Adeline Kane back, maybe have Cora be one of the people who was killed in Brazil. And that's why Derek's kind of after those hunters. Just other stuff they could have done that I think could have helped make the show more compelling. I mean, they did a similar thing with Satomi, and arguably Satomi maybe had a bigger role in the grand scheme of Teen Wolf than Cora did, but, you could make either argument. So, yeah, like I said, 6B, I like 6B. I don't think it's the best season ever. I think it's a great, like, middle season. Actually, especially after this episode, I'll have to sit on it a little bit more. I might like 6B. I think 6B is my fourth favorite season of Teen Wolf. Or sub-season. I don't know, I think I might like 6 more than I do 5 as a whole, maybe. But then definitely 3 is the best. But I'm going to make a whole video for that eventually. But yeah, Season 6 is a little self-indulgent. Because Season 5 would have been a great way a great ending for the show. Where it ended was good. It left enough open that you could kind of make your own assumptions about characters and their relationships and things like that. But I do like that because, 6A was very much nostalgic and remembering things and bringing up past events, whereas 6B was about bringing it back to the problems of the start, hunters versus werewolves, and bringing back a lot of the old cast members. So, and I think that works. And I think they did a good job with that. I think Season 6, again, being not 100% necessary, I think Season 6 was the best that they could make it in a lot of ways. I think this was the best season. And yeah, this is the last episode, the last season of Teen Wolf. It's been a long journey going from a show that was all about Scott learning how to control his powers as a werewolf, and some of his biggest problems being how to keep his condition a secret from Allison, the girl that he liked, to this show that's about, survival in a lot of ways. And we've gone through a lot of ups and downs, the whole thing with Jackson, Allison dying, a lot of characters coming and going, which is, that's both a good thing and a bad thing. I know a lot of people don't like new characters, but I was fairly okay with it. Like, I feel like most characters who left the show left at a good point, when it's like, what other stories are you going to tell with them that are like 100% necessary to tell? So, yeah. Again, I like how even the final episode was even more self-indulgent. They brought back Berserkers, they brought back Void Styles, they brought back the Duroc, they brought back the Oni. They did so much. Again, maybe bringing back Kira might have been a cool thing to do, and how they just didn't bring her back. But, yeah. It's been a long ride. So, I'm going to have to find something else to do with my time, even though I do plan on buying, like, a lot of the... I have just about every DVD of every season, so I do plan on buying 6B, and maybe I'll get the series, depending on what's in it. Maybe I'll get the series box set. Maybe. I probably will. I probably will. But, okay, so... thanks for watching. I'm planning on doing a list where I'm going to rank each season of Teen Wolf and give my reason for each. But yeah, thank you for watching. This has been 100 episodes of one of my favorite shows ever, and yeah, I'll see you later.